On a plantation, an enslaved woman near 70 was burned for witchcraft, her face younger than the master's own daughter. Her name was Amara. She had been taken as a child from a small tribe in Africa. In that final moment before the world she knew was torn away, a grandmother pressed a handful of small seeds into the girl's palm. Keep these, she whispered. Keep them and remember. Through chains and ocean crossings, through the brutality of auction and field, Amara carried them, hidden, forgotten, a few grains of memory wrapped in fear and hope. The work began when she was a little girl. Endless rows, endless sun. Years added themselves to her shoulders, to her back, to her hands. The field was a machine that ground life into labor. On that plantation, the system was designed to break women early, to use them until the light in them dimmed and their bodies gave out. Amara felt the ache in her joints. She felt the slow loosening of skin from years under an unforgiving sky. She believed that the years had caught her at last and that the end would come quietly in the same place where her days began, under the same sun. One night, as the weight of years pressed down, a memory stirred. The seeds, the old teaching. Behind the slave cabins, out of sight and in the thin doubt of moonlight, she found a patch of earth. She pressed those small, stubborn seeds into the soil. She did not pray for miracles. She remembered instruction. She remembered care. She waited. Months passed. The seasons moved in tireless rhythm. Then, one morning, the dirt split and something green pushed through. A shoot, a leaf, a return. Amara recognized the shape and what it had meant in her grandmother's hands. She remembered the method, the leaves boiled in water, the timing of the brew, the quiet ritual repeated dawn after dawn. At first, there was nothing that anyone could name, the same steps, the same tasks. Then, within weeks, the change became a murmur. Skin that had loosened began to draw back to the body. The sagging around her legs receded. The heaviness in her limbs gave way. Energy returned where it had been absent for years. The tired woman who had been known for decades began to look like someone else, a figure that belonged to a younger chapter of life. Those who worked beside her took notice. Whispers rose in the rows like wind through the cane. The master noticed too. He assigned lighter labor. He offered softer cloth. He watched her with an attention that felt like a hand on the back of her neck. A woman nearly 70 began to look younger than women half her age. The order of things seemed to tilt. And on the porch, the master's daughter watched the tilt with growing heat behind her eyes. She saw attention drift from her to Amara. She felt the threat of a woman who did not obey the expected decline. The whisper and the gaze became a story. The story became a charge: witchcraft, stealing youth, stealing life. The fear that always lay beneath the surface of that place found a focus. The daughter moved to end it. The order was given. The punishment was fire. They tied Amara to a wooden post. The people gathered because this machine of life and labor had its rituals of violence as well as its rituals of work. They watched because they feared to look away. The fire rose, alive and hungry. They waited for the scream, the expected sound of surrender. She did not scream. As the flames climbed, Amara smiled. It was not defiance for show. It was a knowing smile, and it cut deeper than any wail could. It terrified them because it did not belong to the script they understood. It terrified them because it suggested that something had already slipped out of their reach. What they did not know was that the secret had already moved from one set of hands to another. The other women had learned. Behind cabins, in whispers that did not belong to them, the preparation had been taught. The knowledge had spread like roots beneath the soil, silent and alive. A flame could consume a body, but it could not find the path those roots had taken. Once knowledge spreads, it cannot be burned away. Time passed, fields changed, the cabin walls weathered and collapsed. The stories migrated from mouths to memory. For centuries, the plant from Amara's homeland faded to the edges of recall. It became a rumor of a remedy, a shadow among many shadows. Then, in the language of laboratories and journals, a name surfaced: Rhodiola rosea, a root named and described as powerful, a root said to help balance stress, to boost energy, to support healthy aging. The old teaching was given a scientific name and a modern description. In the telling, another voice enters. It says that large companies do not want this knowledge to be known because it is easier to sell expensive pills that barely work. It is a claim that rides the edges of commerce and control. In this telling, a modern woman speaks. She says she began taking rhodiola 2 years ago. She says her energy returned. She says her skin improved. She says she finally felt like herself again. She speaks in the current tense of struggle against hot flashes that marked her hours, against belly fat that refused to leave, against sagging legs that made her hide. She was told it was just menopause. She says those doctors were wrong. She says many women are simply missing what their bodies need. In that modern voice, there is also a continuity, a claim that when a woman has energy, clarity, confidence, she becomes dangerous to those who require her compliant and exhausted. The story connects a grandmother's whisper to a present day promise. It names a Black owned brand called Salva that seeks to bring rhodiola back. It says there is a month of supply for under $25. It says demand was so great that it sold out in less than a day and has returned. It says that if the orange button still appears, there is still stock. It says the secret Amara protected was never meant to disappear. Here, the narrative stands at the meeting place of memory and modern claim. On one side, an enslaved woman who planted seeds in hidden ground and drank in the quiet dawn. On the other, a named root with a laboratory identity and a place in the market. Between them, the unbroken line of knowledge passed from hand to hand, from grandmother to granddaughter, from woman to woman, across centuries that tried to erase them. What is certain within this story is the shape of its passage. A child torn from her home carries seeds. A woman worn by years remembers and plants. A body renews in ways that those around her cannot accept. Fear moves faster than understanding, and violence tries to hold power. A fire is lit. A smile crosses a face. In that smile, a message is sent that knowledge cannot be contained by rope or flame. What is named in the present is Rhodiola rosea. In this account, it is said to balance the burdens of stress, to lift energy, to support a graceful passage through age. It is said to offer an answer that is both old and renewed. It is said that institutions of commerce resist such answers because they are difficult to control. It is said that a modern brand brings it back to people who have been overlooked and underserved. Through it all, the core remains the same: seed, soil, leaf, root, memory, instruction. A quiet act done before dawn that becomes a revelation at noon. The women who learn to boil and drink and share. The ones who hid knowledge beneath the surface of a violent world and let it travel where no overseer could follow. If there is a single image that endures, it is that of Amara's hands in the dirt behind the cabins. The small seeds her grandmother gave her pressed into the earth, the first green that answered her patience, the cup brought to her lips at morning, the return of strength to a body that had given so much, the look on the faces of those who saw what they had been told was impossible, the porch where envy gathered, the square where fear lashed out, the flames that rose, the smile that answered them. The story ends by returning to its beginning and to a truth it wants to carry forward. The secret was never meant to disappear. It lived in a handful of seeds and in a lesson about what knowledge can do when it is shared. It lived in the names of women and in the hushed spaces where power does not listen. It lives now in a root with a name that scientists recognize and that markets can sell. It lives in testimony that says energy can return and that aging can be met with grace. In the hush after the flames fade, the lesson remains. There are truths that find their way through time, truths that travel underground until they reach light again. Amara's secret, planted behind the cabins, belongs to that family of truths. It cannot be burned, it can only be passed on.